The room went silent. Until Stephen Miller did the unthinkable. Under the blinding lights of the packed congressional hearing, tension hung thick in the air. Cameras zoomed in, reporters leaned forward, and every eye locked on the two figures. At the center of the storm, Stephen Miller, a man known for his relentless aggression, and Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman who had already built a reputation for speaking truth to power, moved to next. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss explosive political showdowns like this. So, it started with a question, calm, measured, and direct. Jasmine spoke with clarity, her voice carrying the weight of thousands who had entrusted her with their stories. But before she could finish her sentence, Miller leaned in, cut across her words, and seized the floor. The room shifted. Gasps rippled. Through the crowd, Jasmine paused, her eyes fixed on Miller, steady, unshaken, but sharp as steel. She waited, her silence louder than his interruption, and then it happened again. And again. His voice rose, dismissive, layered with a kind of arrogance that dared her to fight back. By the third interruption, whispers filled the chamber. By the fourth, the tension became unbearable. Some leaned back, shaking their heads. Others fumbled for their phones, already sensing this moment was about to go viral. But Jasmine, she didn't flinch, she didn't break. She watched, she listened, and she waited. Her composure became the quiet rebellion Miller wasn't ready for, and here's the thing: 6 times he tried to shut her down, and 6 times she refused to surrender the dignity of her voice. What she said on her 7th attempt left the entire hearing in shock. A single line that would ricochet across social media, dominate headlines, and ignite a wave of applause. Heard far beyond the walls of Washington. But this was just the first spark of a firestorm nobody saw coming. It wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was a showdown that had the weight of the nation resting on it. Inside those wood-paneled walls, decisions were being debated that could shape the very fabric of American identity, policies tied to immigration, civil rights, and who gets to have a voice in the halls of power. And at the heart of it stood 2 figures locked in a collision course, Stephen Miller and Jasmine Crockett on one side. Miller, a man infamous for crafting some of the harshest immigration policies in modern history, a strategist who had built his career on confrontation and control. On the other, Jasmine, a rising voice in Congress, representing communities long ignored, determined to stand firm in the face of systemic power. This wasn't just about one question or one answer. It was about dignity versus dominance, truth versus distortion. The air was thick with anticipation. As Jasmine began presenting her point carefully, calmly, with precision, Miller struck. The first interruption came quick, sharp, almost surgical. He didn't just disagree, he dismantled her sentence mid-thought, redirecting the narrative toward his agenda. Jasmine froze, inhaled deeply, and without raising her voice, resumed. Then came the second interruption. Louder this time. More forceful. He wasn't just challenging her facts, he was challenging her right to speak them. Every time Jasmine tried to finish her point, one reporter later wrote, Stephen pounced, louder, sharper, more aggressive. By the third interruption, tension clawed at the edges of the room. Some leaned forward, captivated. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the imbalance growing. It wasn't just debate anymore, it was dominance on display. Jasmine's expression remained unchanged. No sighs, no frowns. Just a piercing calm that said, without words, I've seen men like you before. The fourth interruption drew murmurs from the audience. Staffers exchanged glances, cameras caught the subtle tightening of Miller's jaw, and already clips were circulating online. Twitter threads lit up. Miller's losing it, one user posted, while another replied, watch Crockett's face, she's waiting to end him. By the 5th interruption, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and waited. Miller's words came fast, layered with disdain, but she gave him nothing, no reaction. Just quiet control. Then came the 6th interruption, the loudest yet, Miller's voice reverberating across the chamber. It was his last, desperate attempt. To hold the floor, to assert control, to silence the one person who refused to play by his rules. But Jasmine? She wasn't rattled, she wasn't intimidated. She wasn't backing down. In that silence between his last outburst and her measured breath, the entire room could feel it, a shift, a quiet storm gathering behind her composure, and that's when viewers watching live realized something was about to happen. Something no one, not Miller, not the committee, not the country, was prepared for. What Jasmine said next would change everything. It would flip the power dynamic in a single, surgical strike, and when it landed, Stephen Miller's entire strategy would begin to crumble. But to understand why this battle mattered so much, we need to step back and uncover the forces behind the chaos. To understand the tension in that hearing, you have to understand the man who tried to dominate it. Stephen Miller wasn't just another politician. From the earliest days of his career, he had carved out a reputation for relentless aggression, unapologetic arrogance, and a willingness to bend every rule to his advantage. His name alone carried weight in certain circles, a mix of fear and respect depending on who you asked. But anyone who dared cross him quickly learned that respect could slip into intimidation in a heartbeat. Miller rose to prominence in the corridors of power by mastering the art of manipulation. Policies, speeches, and debates were never just about facts or ideals for him, they were weapons. Every sentence, every pause, every interruption was calculated to assert dominance, to control the narrative, and to suppress dissent. Those who tried to speak against him often found themselves drowned out by his precision, his timing, and his sharp-tongued rhetoric. His history was riddled with clashes. Journalists remembered him for turning press conferences into duels. Opponents remembered him for cutting through arguments with the clinical efficiency of someone trained to win, not to listen. The more they struggled to push back, the stronger he seemed to grow, as if conflict itself fueled his confidence. Miller's presence on a debate floor was magnetic, not in inspiration, but in sheer pressure, forcing others into defensive postures while he set the pace, set the tone, and set the rules. Social media had long documented his moments of confrontation. Clips of his sharp interruptions, his biting comments, and his dismissive gestures circulated online, drawing both supporters and critics. Every misstep became fodder for trending hashtags, and every calculated outburst was analyzed, dissected, and shared. During the Congressional hearing, the first hints of public reaction already flickered through smartphones. Hashtag Miller Meltdown is trending as viewers replay his outbursts. The digital audience was alert, anticipating the moment when his relentless strategy might finally meet resistance. To Miller, this wasn't just a debate. It was a battlefield, and he wasn't ready to lose. He thrived on confrontation, on the chaos he could create, on the subtle psychological games that left his opponents unsettled. Every interruption in the hearing wasn't random. It was a methodical push toward one objective: silence the opposition and dominate the conversation. His reputation had been built on these tactics, and in his mind he was simply doing what he was trained to do. Yet, underneath the arrogance and the calculated moves, there was something more revealing, a rigid belief in his own authority, an unshakable confidence that the rules of engagement belonged entirely to him. He approached every debate with the same mindset he had cultivated for years, that yielding or compromise was weakness, and the loudest voice in the room always dictated reality. It was precisely this combination of confidence, aggression, and disdain for opposition that made Miller a formidable villain in the narrative of Jasmine Crockett's rise. He was not merely an obstacle. He embodied the very challenge she had trained to confront, a system that preferred to talk over truth, to silence new voices, to reward intimidation over integrity, and that is why, in that hearing, every interruption carried weight. Every sharp retort, every dismissive glance, every loud assertion from Miller was designed to assert that weight. But he had not accounted for one thing. Jasmine Crockett was not just another opponent. She was a hero in her own right, shaped by struggle, fortified by purpose, and ready to respond in ways that would leave him exposed. Miller may have believed he controlled the battlefield, but he had underestimated the force that stood directly across from him. But Miller wasn't the only fighter in the room. Jasmine Crockett had her own story, and she came prepared. Raised in a world where dignity had to be fought for, Jasmine Crockett carried her community's hopes into every room she entered. From an early age, she understood that words could build bridges or walls, that speaking up could invite applause or attack. Her upbringing was steeped in the reality of struggle. Families working double shifts, neighborhoods overlooked by policy, communities told their voices didn't matter. And yet she learned to listen, to absorb, and to respond with clarity and courage. Her journey into public service wasn't a choice made lightly. It was a calling forged by experience. Jasmine saw the gaps in representation and knew that silence was a luxury she could not afford, nor could the people she represented. Every campaign stop, every town hall, every meeting in a packed room was a chance to validate those who had been ignored for too long. She carried the stories of teachers, immigrants, single parents, and dreamers like armor, knowing that each word she spoke was a lifeline for someone who had been silenced. It was in these moments of public scrutiny that her reputation began to grow. Colleagues and constituents alike noticed something rare. Jasmine Crockett was unflinching under pressure. While others stumbled under scrutiny, she listened. While others responded with anger, she responded with precision. Her comebacks were sharp, not cruel, deliberate, not reactionary. She had a way of taking the weight of confrontation and redirecting it with intelligence, turning attempts to diminish her into opportunities to elevate the conversation, her reputation. For fearless advocacy was not just political, it was personal. Every legislative initiative she championed reflected the realities she had seen firsthand: education reform, immigrant protections, workers' rights, and social justice policies. She spoke not for headlines but for people. Her voice became a mirror of collective resilience, a reminder that courage could thrive even when the system seemed stacked against you. And then there was her presence in the room, commanding, calm, composed. She had learned that true power didn't need volume, it needed focus. Every pause, every carefully measured word conveyed authority. Even when faced with disruption, she could maintain composure in ways that left observers in awe. For Jasmine, confrontation wasn't an obstacle. It was the stage on which she proved her mettle. The hearings where she faced Stephen Miller were no exception. She understood that the stakes were higher than personal victory. They were about representation, about the dignity of every voice in the room, and about challenging the arrogance of a man who had silenced so many before her. She didn't just prepare arguments. She prepared her presence, every glance and intonation designed to communicate confidence and control. Her past had prepared her for this moment. Every experience, the setbacks, the fights for fairness, the moments where she had been dismissed, had forged a resilience few could match. It was resilience that could absorb interruption after interruption and emerge unshaken. While Miller wielded loud words as weapons, she wielded patience and precision, understanding that the right response could dismantle arrogance in ways shouting never could. Even as Miller interrupted her, she drew on decades of learned composure. Each intrusion was met with silence that spoke louder than any rebuttal. Each attempt to dominate the conversation only revealed the depth of her control. The audience could feel it, a subtle shift in energy that hinted at what was coming. Jasmine Crockett was not just enduring. She was strategizing, and yet, despite her calm, there was anticipation in the air. Every eye in the room, every viewer watching live, sensed that something monumental was approaching. They could see it in her steady gaze, in the way she held herself, in the silence that followed every interruption. Something decisive was coming, a statement that would resonate far beyond the walls of the chamber. The seventh line, the one that would redefine the dynamic in that hearing, was still unsaid, but its power was already palpable. The audience could feel the tension, the promise of a moment that would leave its mark on history, even if no one yet knew the words. And then, under blinding lights and roaring cameras, the clash hit its breaking point. The hearing had reached a fever pitch. Cameras panned across the chamber, capturing the tension in every furrowed brow and the hush that fell over the crowd with each exchange. Jasmine Crockett began her statement, measured, deliberate, but before she could finish, it happened. The first interruption? Sharp, abrupt, like a knife slicing through the calm. Miller's voice cut her off mid-sentence. redirecting the discussion toward his talking points, leaving little room for her words to land. The audience flinched, sensing the imbalance, but Jasmine remained composed, letting him finish before resuming with quiet precision. The second interruption was louder, more insistent. Miller leaned forward, gesturing aggressively, his tone sharpened with arrogance. Each syllable seemed designed to dominate the room, to drown out her voice. Yet Jasmine Crockett did not waver. She inhaled, held her posture, and allowed the pause to speak volumes, a silent counterweight to his forceful intrusions. Viewers watching online felt their own frustration mount, the injustice of repeated cutoffs igniting a sense of collective empathy for her struggle. By the third interruption, tension escalated further. Miller's insistence was no longer merely interruption, it was performance, a display of dominance that he believed would break her composure. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras shifted angles, and whispers ran through the room. "She's keeping calm. Remarkable." Yet Jasmine's focus never faltered. Every glance, every measured breath, reinforced the message: she would not be silenced. The fourth interruption rang through the chamber like a warning bell. The audience gasped audibly as he spoke over her again, more forceful and impatient. Social media feeds exploded in real time. Hashtag Jasmine vs. Miller trending as clips circulated, viewers amazed by her poise amidst the onslaught. Commentators tweeted, speculating whether she could withstand the barrage. Every interruption was another test of endurance, another measure of character, and Jasmine met each one with unshakable resolve. The fifth interruption came with sharpness bordering on hostility. Miller's voice carried a sense of urgency and desperation, as though he could sense the shift already taking hold. Cameras captured the subtle tightening of his jaw, the twitch of a hand, a momentary crack in his calculated performance. But Jasmine, still calm, still deliberate, refused to rise to the bait. Each word he pushed forward was met with measured attention, her responses deliberate, slow, and pointed, not a clash but a preparation. By the sixth interruption, the chamber seemed to vibrate with tension. Miller's voice had grown louder, more insistent, as if sheer volume could force compliance. The crowd leaned in, anticipating a breaking point, some holding their breath, others quietly recording every second. Every interruption built on the last, layering frustration, suspense, and anticipation. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained the eye of the storm, calm, composed, unbroken, with a quiet strength that radiated to everyone watching. Every pause between Miller's aggressive interjections only heightened the suspense. The audience, both in the room and across screens nationwide, could feel the weight of each moment, the electricity in the air. Social media commentary intensified, fans praising her resilience, opponents incredulous at her control. Every sixth interruption seemed designed to overpower her, yet each was a step closer to a reckoning that no one could have predicted. And then Jasmine leaned in, locked eyes with Miller, and said just 7 words that flipped the entire hearing upside down. The room held its breath. 6 interruptions, 6 assaults on her voice, 6 tests of her composure, and now, finally, the moment Jasmine Crockett had been building toward. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her, every camera lens, every reporter's pen poised. Even Miller, who had carried himself with that trademark arrogance, could sense the shift. Something was coming. Something precise. Something unstoppable. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of the table. Her eyes locked on Miller's, steady and unwavering. The energy in the room seemed to slow, their ambient noise fading as everyone subconsciously tuned to her. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Just a pause, a deliberate cinematic pause that stretched long enough to feel heavy, like the calm before a storm. Then she spoke 7 words. 7 words that would reverberate through the room, across social media feeds, and into the conversations of millions. Your interruptions will not silence the truth. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of stunned silence swept the chamber. Some mouths hung open, some leaned back in disbelief. Others whispered to one another, unsure if they had heard correctly. The weight of her words, simple, direct, unyielding, struck with the force of a gavel, Phones went up. Clips hit Twitter. Hashtags exploded. It was a cultural moment. Viewers around the country replayed the words, sharing, debating, cheering. Hashtag truth cannot be silenced trended within minutes. Every social media post carried fragments of astonishment. Did you see that line? Absolute fire. Crockett just owned Miller. Every interruption gone. This is why we need voices like hers in Congress. In the room, Miller froze. His usual posture, leaning forward, voice dominant, every word an assertion of control, faltered. The confidence he had wielded like armor throughout the hearing suddenly seemed brittle. His jaw tightened. A twitch in his hand betrayed the realization that the momentum had shifted irrevocably. He had been prepared to dominate, to silence, to assert authority, but nothing in his experience had readied him for a calm, deliberate counterattack delivered with perfect timing and clarity. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained poised. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't gloat. Her power came from her presence, her clarity, her unwavering commitment to truth. Every word had landed with surgical precision, dismantling Miller's dominance while reinforcing her own authority. It was not a victory of volume but of conviction. The chamber erupted, but not immediately with noise. First came murmurs, tentative applause, the subtle recognition that something extraordinary had just happened. Then came louder claps, a ripple of approval spreading outward, catching even the committee members off guard. Some stood, uncertain if they should cheer, then joined the growing acknowledgement of what had just occurred. The energy in the room shifted from tension to awed observers couldn't stop replaying the moment. Analysts dissected every detail, the measured tone, the timing, the strategic pauses, the eye contact that conveyed both confidence and moral authority. Political commentators described it as a turning point, not just in that hearing, but in the broader narrative of civic engagement and leadership. This, one pundit said, was not just a rebuttal. It was a lesson in courage under fire. The aftermath within the room was cinematic. Miller's voice, which had dominated every exchange, fell into uneasy silence. The interruptions that had been his weapon now felt irrelevant. Each attempt to assert control had inadvertently highlighted Jasmine's composure and strength. He shifted in his seat, glanced around, searching for support or validation, finding none. His presence was no longer commanding. It was overshadowed by her mastery of the moment. Meanwhile, Crockett's supporters in the gallery reacted with restrained jubilation. Some stood quietly, holding back cheers, fully aware that decorum demanded composure. Yet their eyes shone with pride, their subtle nods carrying volumes. Every supporter understood that this was a moment where integrity had overcome intimidation, where preparation and calm decisiveness had outmatched raw aggression. Even journalists, known for their impartiality, couldn't hide the recognition. Tweets, live reports, and viral clips began to multiply as the moment spread far beyond the walls of Congress. Every replay, every share, amplified the impact of her 7 words, and every observer felt it, the power of speaking truth with confidence. The cultural resonance of a single, well-timed declaration in the face of repeated attempts to silence it. Jasmine had not just responded. She had reclaimed the room. She had transformed interruption into opportunity, tension into triumph, and aggression into a stage for her unshakable authority. It was a masterclass in political poise, a lesson in resilience, and a moment that would be remembered, discussed, and cited for years to come. And yet, even as the applause rippled, even as hashtags trended and social media lit up, everyone in the room and everyone watching sensed that this was not the conclusion. It was a turning point, a catalyst. What happened next would carry ramifications far beyond the hearing, but this was just the beginning. What happened next shocked even Jasmine's supporters. The moment Jasmine Crockett spoke those 7 words, the room's energy rippled outward. But the real explosion happened online. Within seconds, phones buzzed, notifications pinged, and screens filled with clips of her calm, decisive response. Hashtags ignited, hashtag truth cannot be silenced, hashtag Crockett stands tall, hashtag mic drop politics. Memes began to circulate, capturing her poised gaze and Miller's stunned expression. One featured her with the caption, "Silence is power. Don't mess with her." Another juxtaposed Miller's interruptions with her ultimate line, the contrast impossible to ignore. Social media wasn't just reacting, it was validating. Fans and followers shared clips with captions like, "Finally, someone stood up to him. This is how leadership looks." Every post carried a sense of emotional payoff, a shared pride in witnessing a voice of dignity rise over arrogance. Observers who had felt frustrated by political posturing found relief in this symbolic victory. Twitter feeds became an echo chamber of amazement and celebration. Jasmine Crockett just delivered the line of the year. At Political Pulse read one tweet, another, 6 interruptions. One response, absolute legend. Political commentators scrambled to catch up, parsing her tone, timing, and composure. Analysts described it as more than a debate moment. It was a masterclass in communication, courage, and strategy. Meanwhile, celebrities began weighing in. A popular actor tweeted, "Watching Jasmine Crockett in that hearing reminded me why representation matters." Late-night shows replayed the moment, dissecting it with enthusiasm, framing her as the heroine standing against political bullying. Her image became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of calm strength under pressure, the kind of leadership that resonated across demographics and political affiliations. Even politicians who had not supported her agenda recognized the power of her performance. Some cautiously praised her composure. Others analyzed the tactical brilliance behind her measured delivery. The chatter wasn't just about her words. It was about the principle they represented, dignity, truth, and the courage to speak when the system tried to impose silence. Fans of Jasmine Crockett flooded comment sections and forums with reflections of personal connection. Many shared stories of times they had been interrupted, dismissed, or ignored, relating to her calm defiance. Others wrote about pride in seeing someone who represented their communities finally dismantle arrogance with poise. Across the digital landscape, viewers felt part of something larger, a movement affirming the power of courage, strategy, and dignity in the face of repeated challenges. Even mainstream news outlets framed the moment as a cultural flashpoint. Headlines blared, "Freshman Congresswoman delivers viral mic drop against controversial advisor. Dignity triumphs over disruption. Crockett versus Miller," and 7 words millions inspired. A political moment goes viral. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was a statement about how individuals could reclaim power in spaces built to intimidate, showing the public that courage and calm intelligence could turn confrontation into triumph. Memes, tweets, and commentaries weren't just entertainment. They were collective validation. Every share reinforced the emotional resonance. Every retweet spread the moral of the story. Resilience and integrity could prevail. Social media had amplified her impact, creating a digital echo that extended far beyond the chamber walls. Audiences celebrated not just her victory, but the reaffirmation of a principle many felt was under threat: the right to be heard, the power of truth, and the value of composure under fire, but beneath the cheers and viral headlines. A deeper story was unfolding. In the quiet aftermath of the hearing, beyond the flashes of cameras and the viral clips, a larger truth emerged. Jasmine Crockett's 7 words were more than a rebuttal to Stephen Miller's aggression. They were a reminder of the power inherent in dignity, the quiet strength of persistence, and the courage it takes to stand for truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. Every interruption, every attempt to silence her, became a mirror reflecting a universal reality. Arrogance can dominate noise, but it cannot silence conviction. Jasmine's calm, deliberate response demonstrated that composure is not weakness, it is strategy. It is a shield forged from experience, resilience, and an unshakable belief in what is right. Audiences everywhere felt it. Viewers didn't just witness a political exchange. They witnessed a lesson in personal and collective empowerment. Her actions became symbolic, a blueprint for anyone who has ever faced voices louder than their own, for anyone who has felt dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. Jasmine reminded us all that courage isn't always about volume. It's about clarity, timing, and moral fortitude. Sometimes it only takes one voice, one sentence to remind the world what courage sounds like. Her words rippled far beyond the chamber, in classrooms, offices, living rooms, and social media threads. People discussed them not as entertainment, but as inspiration. They saw in her example a reflection of their own struggles, the victories they longed to claim, and the dignity they were determined to protect. This moment also reframed the idea of conflict. It was no longer simply about winning a debate. It was about standing ground with integrity, about proving that those who wield arrogance as a weapon can be met with calm strength and moral authority. It reminded the nation that standing firm isn't just an act of defiance, it is an act of leadership, an assertion that truth and justice are worth every moment of perseverance. Jasmine's response became a cultural touchstone, a rallying cry for the values many felt under siege. It highlighted the importance of representation, showing that when voices like hers are amplified, they carry not only facts, but hope, dignity, and empowerment for those who have been marginalized. The emotional resonance of her actions reaffirmed the power of identity, that one can carry the hopes of a community and translate them into a force that challenges entrenched power. And while the viral moment captured attention, the deeper lesson endured. It wasn't just about defeating an opponent. It was about modeling courage, demonstrating that resilience can reshape spaces dominated by intimidation, and proving that standing up for one's principles can inspire millions. In that sense, the hearing became more than politics. It became a story of perseverance, of strength under fire, of dignity that refuses to be compromised. Jasmine Crockett's voice became a beacon, a reminder that the truth can pierce through arrogance, that calm authority can topple loud aggression, and that leadership is often defined not by domination, but by measured, courageous action. And now, it's your turn to make your voice heard. The hearing, the interruptions, the 7 words, it all comes back to one undeniable truth. Courage can change the room, and dignity can silence arrogance. Stephen Miller's attempts to dominate the floor only highlighted Jasmine Crockett's resilience, her intelligence, and her unshakable commitment to truth. What started as a political clash became a defining moment, a lesson in how one voice, wielded with precision and conviction, can ripple across the nation. If Jasmine's 7th line gave you chills, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because the fight for truth isn't stopping here. This isn't just a story to watch and forget. It's a call to action, a reminder that standing up, speaking out, and defending what's right is something each of us can do every day. The power of one person, one statement, one moment of courage can inspire millions and shift the course of a conversation. We want to hear from you. What would you have said if you were in Jasmine Crockett's shoes? How would you respond when someone tries to silence your voice or undermine your truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's turn this moment into a discussion, a movement, a chance for all of us to reflect on the power of resilience and integrity. Remember, this isn't just about politics. It's about dignity, identity, and the courage to speak when it matters most. Every voice matters, every story counts. And every time we choose to stand firm in the face of intimidation, we contribute to a legacy of truth that cannot be silenced. Subscribe. The Bald Congress for more stuff. Share this video with everyone who wants to enjoy the truths. And keep watching, because the next moment of courage is always just around the corner.